Hello, everybody. Hi, welcome. I'm Jen Bradovich. I'm IPCNY's Director of Exhibitions and Programs. Thanks so much for joining me tonight for our final artist conversation accompanying the exhibition Unfinished New Prints 2022 Winter, selected by Queer Archive Work. New Prints is our open call program bringing together print-based works that were all made in the previous 12 months. Tonight, you're going to hear from Shannon Finnegan, Benjamin Merritt, and Terry Schupbach-Gordon. All these artists have work currently on view in Unfinished. You can see the show at our Chelsea exhibition space until March 26th, and you can also see the show virtually on our website, ipcny.org. Tonight's event has auto-generated captions, so to turn those on, hit the CC button at the bottom of your screen. The talk is also being recorded and it will be available on our website in about a week or so. So I will invite our artists to join me on screen. They can turn their cameras on. Welcome, Terry. Welcome, Shannon. Welcome, Benjamin. I'm going to be moderating tonight. So we are going to go around and hear from each artist. We're going to learn about their work. I'll ask some questions and see if we can get a conversation going amongst ourselves. For folks at home, please send any of your questions using the Q&A box. I will take them throughout the night if they're coming in, and then I'll save some for the end if you all just want to wait till the end to talk about your questions. The public chat will also be open, so you can contribute to the conversation there if you have comments or you want to say hi. If we have other unfinished artists in the audience, please say hello. Let us know that you're here with us. So let's get going. Terry, Benjamin, and Shannon are three artists with interesting points of intersection and divergence in their work. And all of them deal with the body and issues of access, disability, chronic illness, how bodies are represented, how their experiences are represented through language and imagery, how they navigate space. For Queer Archive Work, the organizers of this exhibition, practices like these have a liberatory politics. They poetically and productively challenge the ways that we think about being in the world. So with that, I will invite Shannon to start, and then we'll go to Benjamin and then Terry.
Hi, everyone. This is Shannon. As we're getting the slides up, I'll just start by saying I'm so excited to be here, and I did a lot of printmaking as an undergrad, and so it was really fun to get to I now work in a more multidisciplinary way or across a lot of different mediums, but it was really fun to go back kind of through projects and notice all of the ways that printmaking still continues to be kind of woven through my practice. Yeah, so I'm going to start off with this piece, which is the one in the show, that is based on a bingo board that I made during an 8-month fight with my insurance company last year. A friend of mine, Brianne Trammell, introduced me to this concept of kind of like DIY bingo. And another friend of mine was talking about that their therapist suggested using bingo as a kind of intention setting or expectation setting tool for difficult experiences. So I had this idea of making a bingo board that I could literally kind of check off as I was on the phone with my insurance company. The first one that I made was just for myself, kind of really quickly, and then felt so lucky to get to publish this as a risograph print with Childish Books. If we can go to the next slide. This is also based on, I did a drawing of it first, and it's a little bit, the drawing and the print are a little bit different because in between I also posted online about this and asked people about some of their kind of bingos for calling their health insurance company, and incorporated some of those into the print version. Yeah, continue to use it when I have to call my insurance company to channel some of that rage and try to make that experience more bearable. The next one. A big part of my practice for the past 3 years has been a collaboration with another disabled artist, Bojana Kokliat, about expressive and poetic approaches to image descriptions, which is a really important access practice in digital spaces, especially thinking about social media and websites. And we were doing a lot of workshops for this project. And so we made this takeaway for people who came to the workshops that says artists for alt text, as a way of kind of hopefully getting artists excited about thinking about access and image description in their practices. Next slide. And Bojana and I also published a book together. I have always loved making zines as a way of kind of like thinking through ideas, and this ended up feeling like kind of a bigger, more elaborate zine, but we had been doing this series of workshops about about creative approaches to image description, and decided we wanted to create a kind of like self-guided version of that, or a different channel for disseminating some of that information. And we publish it across a lot of different formats, like as a Google Doc, as a PDF, as an audiobook, but also decided to make a print version of it. So self-published this in 2020, and we're really lucky to work with some designers on this and a companion platform. And I are hoping to publish a second edition of this book also coming up. Next slide. This is a zine project that is from a little bit longer ago, but I think one way that zines or prints come into my practice is like as a way of thinking through an idea before, kind of ruminating on something, or kind of, it feels like a really, this is just made on a photocopier, so it's a pretty, it's a one-page zine, and a pretty easy and affordable way to kind of explore an idea. And so this was the first version of this idea that I had about my frustration with the lack of places to sit in galleries and museums. We can go to the next slide. Had gone to a museum, had been feeling like just really in a lot of pain, and really frustrated by there just being such sparse seating options. And so had this idea of kind of creating furniture that also could exist as seating, and also kind of protest some of the access issues in the space. So there's one here that says, "This exhibition has asked me to stand for too long, sit if you agree." Or kind of like lounge furniture that says, "I need a break, lounge if you agree." And at the time, I had really no idea how to build or make furniture or anything like that. I've since made these into objects, but this was a really important step for me in terms of thinking about this idea, sharing it with other people, and starting to work through what kind of shape and form this project could take. Next slide. This is a kind of one-off project that I still really love. My friend Brianne did this project called Eastern Pole. Maybe is still doing it. That's a kind of like quote unquote gallery space. Well, I don't need to put it in quotes. A gallery space on a telephone pole. This was when it was in Cincinnati. It travels around, and it's just a 8.5 by 11 printout that gets taped to the pole as a kind of public exhibition. And I made a drawing. Oh, there's a little bit of a train in the background. I don't know if you all can hear that. But I had, I was thinking about this. I made this in 2018. I had recently learned about the 504 sit-in, which is a really important disability rights protest, and felt sad that I hadn't learned it as a disabled kid, or that wasn't more part of the kind of history that I was taught, and was thinking about how to kind of like point to that without having to, like, there were already a lot of great resources online about the project documented, or the protest documenting it. And so I made this drawing of the search bar just to kind of try to point people to look it up. if they weren't already familiar. And next slide. And then this is a kind of bigger, kind of more elaborate project. It's called Anti-Stairs Club Lounge, and this was a protest of something in New York City called the Vessel, which is it's in this image. It's a kind of building-sized public monument that's it's all stairs. It's like this kind of basket-like structure of interconnected stairways. I think they sometimes referred to as a 1 mile vertical climb. And when I found out about this project, I was really angry, because I think we're often told that things can't be accessible because there isn't a budget, or because of historic architecture, or things like that. And this project had a $150 million production budget, and it's in this newly developed area called Hudson Yards. And I was just so frustrated by that kind of blatant inaccessibility, and so gathered a group of about 40 people to protest that space, and kind of do that by being together and hanging out, and and kind of using public space in ways that we were interested in, which is like, lounging, gathering, resting, things like that. Next slide. And there were some like print elements that got woven into this. So this is a risograph print that everyone who participated in the lounge like signed a pledge that said, "As long as I live, I will not go up a single step of the vessel." So Anti-Stairs Club Lounge operates as kind of an alternative to an inaccessible space, but there is this kind of request for solidarity for especially like non-disabled people who want to participate in it. And next slide. And there's also these big newspapers that I wasn't sure what would be not allowed in the space. I thought maybe signage wouldn't be allowed because this was a kind of unauthorized project. And so one way I realized I could work around that was by making these newspapers that, as people were reading them, the exterior side says Anti-Stairs Club Lounge and kind of marks that as what's happening there. And then the inside had an article that a friend and colleague, Kevin Gotkin, wrote about the vessel called Stair Worship. So it also functioned as a kind of point of reference if people wanted to know more about like why we were protesting that space. And there are also these orange beanies were another big part of the project that have this crossed out stairs symbol on it, which was the kind of way that we marked that we were a group and that we were kind of like in this lounge together. So yeah, that's it for me, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Shannon. I love that we started with this work because there's kind of a I don't know, there's sort of like a spirit of play in your work or in your practice that feels, I think, really generous for dealing with these like topics that I think, I know you've also done the Anti-Stairs Club iterations of this project in other art spaces, right? In art spaces that are inaccessible spaces. Like I know at the WSAIC project, you may want to talk about that a little bit, but I think like for institutional spaces that are trying to kind of deal with accessibility, like this can be such a tough thing to grapple with from like the organizational perspective, but there's such a generous kind of like humor that invites us into your work. And I wonder if you can talk just a little bit about the role of that kind of playfulness in your work for you.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the access that I experience in the world is this very compliance oriented approach that it feels like very kind of checkbox, and I think what I've experienced in disability communities feels really different from that, and it feels much more creative, much more generative, much more playful, much more rooted in relationships. And I think that's something that I really draw on in the work. And I think the humor also, I definitely think there's sometimes this thing that happens when people are talking about disability and maybe the other panelists also have thoughts on this, where it's like the utmost seriousness. And for me, I don't like things are bad and hard sometimes, but also sometimes things are like weird or funny or like so upsetting that I feel like I just want to like laugh at the absurdity of how bad things are.
Play bingo while trying to get in touch with the insurance company. Lauren in the chat said the bingo is very relatable, and I agree. There's that kind of like finding a kind of humor in that just like abject, like helplessness of bureaucracy and of institutions, right? That I think is like just like a really generous thing that you give us in the work. I also love that, you know, the projects that you're doing are like, you know, you really emphasize like intervening in these public spaces, right? The benches are physically in exhibition spaces and have this like very direct mode of address to the viewer. With the anti-stairs club lounges, you know, folks enter into this participatory space with your works, whether those are objects or whether those are like signing this sort of like this kind of statement of solidarity to never go up the vessel, which I just love so much. And I would love to sign one of those statements. Can you talk?
I have a PDF on my website if you want to, you can print it out.
Please, I would love to. I just wonder, like, how did you kind of come to, like, how did you arrive at a place where that kind of like social engagement and getting others involved in the work and like a really, I mean, you're dealing with work about the body, right? And how we move through space. So like really just addressing the viewer's body and putting their physicality into the equation, like how you kind of arrived at that.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, and I in some ways I feel, well, you know, I was making a lot of 2D work before. After I was doing a lot of printmaking, I was doing a lot of drawing. And then one thing that I realized is that I really wanted to center other disabled people as the kind of like primary audience for my work. And then thinking about, as you kind of mentioned, there's so much inaccessibility in the kind of structures and protocols for exhibiting and sharing artwork. And so that's when I started to think more about those kind of relationships. And I think also was like getting much more in tune with my own access needs and feeling like a kind of renewed frustration around some of that. And so I think that's what led me to start thinking more about kind of like the relationships or the kind of way that people interact in a given space or situation.
Yeah. If anybody in the audience has questions about Shannon, put those, or for Shannon, or about Shannon's work, put those into the Q&A, and I will get to those a little bit later in the program. And then Shannon, I'll just ask you one more, which is, I love that you focused here on what the role that print has played in your practice, which is, as you mentioned, really interdisciplinary, and you're kind of using, you know, different ways of getting at these ideas. Like there's a flexibility to your work, right? The Alt Text as Poetry project exists as a workshop that's participatory, and then it becomes it was this zine, and then it also becomes, and now it's this publication that's also a Google Doc that is also can be listened to. And so I love that you're kind of thinking about print as another one of those modes for dissemination. And so you mentioned that you had been doing some printmaking before. Were you like doing this kind of like low cost zine making previously? Was that like a part of your work? And was it about that, was the dissemination, where I'm going with this question is, was it that ability to disseminate the information? What attracted you to this? Because that's how it looks from my kind of outsider perspective here.
Yeah, I think so. And I think actually, I mean, someone who came up a lot in my presentation is a friend and colleague, Brianne Trammell, who I think also uses print in that way in her practice a lot, that it's like, really using that part of printmaking that is about, being able to send things. And I think also, I mean, when I was making in undergrad and enjoyed that kind of like format. And then I think also as I started making more drawings, a lot of them were super time intensive and felt quite precious, but I missed that thing that can happen with prints where you have some and you can swap with your friends, or you can send it to someone, or you can, you have the test print and you can cut it up and mail it to someone, or things like that. And so I felt really drawn to, kind of keeping some modes of printmaking through like photocopying or zines or stuff like that to kind of keep that as part of my practice.
Yeah, that kind of built-in, there's like that built-in kind of social practice to that kind of zine making and distribution for sure, because your audience becomes, right, like infinite too. Your network becomes as far as those pieces can travel. And so there's like a really interesting like way of thinking about how the work like multiplies and gets to new audiences that way. Awesome.
Yeah, well, and like with the furniture project, for example, it's like I had that idea and I really wanted to just like talk about that with other people. And so by making the zine and I was like sending it out to people, and it became a way also for me to like, build a kind of conversation that I wanted to have around that topic.
Sure. Cool. Thank you, Shannon. I'm going to invite Benjamin to join me. Shannon, we'll bring you back at the end. Thank you very much. Hi, Benjamin.
How's it going?
Pull your slide up here and we'll hear from you about your work.
Sweet. So yeah, thank you everybody for stopping by. Thank you, Shannon. Yeah, this is the piece of mine that's at the exhibition right now. It's a woodcut, kind of hung in 3 different rows. And I guess I'll like just go through some of my work and talk about a larger body of work that I've been working on. I kind of think of my practice right now as like a personal exploration of language and trying to like create a language for myself that accurately shows my experience of chronic illness. If you've ever been to a doctor's appointment, you know that you're being talked about and it gets really kind of awkward and uncomfortable. And so I think my practice is a response to that and trying to find a way for myself to describe my body that feels more genuine. Because if you're chronically ill, it's your whole life. And so there's a lot that like the doctor's appointment is not getting at. There's a lot of aspects of your life that are just untouched. And I think bringing those aspects of life to chronic illness makes chronic illness a much more dynamic and human thing than it's talked about generally. So this piece says, the choir sings of loss again, and you mouth the words before they're sung. And this was like me thinking about flare-ups and chronic illness and kind of like learning a pace of them. And I was thinking about music and lyrics. I think of my work as very lyrical. So this piece, like thinking about the idea of like, if you know a song really well, you like mouth the words before the song gets to them, and like kind of echoing that sentiment with your own body where you're like, you feel yourself getting sicker. And so you kind of like anticipate that in a certain way. And for the lyrical part of my work, I remember one day I was like, I grew up listening to a lot of like hardcore music, so a lot of punk music, and going to a lot of punk shows. There's always these great moments where like the vocalist will just put the mic in the crowd and all the people in the crowd will like shout back these like very sad lyrics. And there's like a wonderful moment that happens where like everyone in the crowd is like acknowledging this like hard feeling, but there's a lot of joy in that because everyone's like doing it together. So I kind of like want that to happen in my work, where it's kind of like not sad, but like it's a tough emotion to admit that you're feeling. And so when you do that publicly with other people, there's like a joy to that in a weird way. So the next slide, please. This is a show that just came down in Minneapolis. It was up for about a month and a half. It was a solo exhibition. So on the left side, there's about 27 prints hung up that are part of an artist book that you can also see in the middle there on the table. And then there's another etching in the back that says "Ache with Many." This is just an installation shot. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see, here's one of the prints. So a lot of my work is etching, and I like etching. I've been drawn to etching for a really long time because of how bodily copper feels, and you can like scrape into it, and like it shows these scars on the surface. And I got really into etching when I was like going through these surgery consultations to have like a large skin graft, and I was interested in like the idea of grafting and like skin regrowing and how your body always reveals something. But also there's something really beautiful about, like, if you go to the next slide as well, and flip through those a little bit, because you can kind of see like, if you go back and forth between those slides, you can see like how the print is still visible in the other print, and that's like a very inherent thing to monoprints and ghost prints. And so I'm really drawn to that method of printmaking because it reveals this like multiplicity of perception. And doing this artist book, I was really thinking about, this artist book is all basically monoprints and monotypes. And I was thinking about the way that in having a chronic illness or disability, you're embodying it in a much different way, depending on who you're talking to or who you're presenting yourself to. So like the way that I kind of go about showing my illness is much different to my coworkers versus like my parents or somebody. So there's like a certain element of like masking that you have to do if you're sick. And I think having prints that exist in multiple different ways kind of reflect that embodiment in a really beautiful way. You can go to the next slide. So yeah, there's like staining and scratches that happen with copper and monoprints that I think is really reflective of like bodily marks. And yeah, I think also with etching and monoprints, you can obviously like printing multiples is a huge advantage, but also like being able to create larger installations. Like if you go back to the installation shot of it, there's like something kind of wonderful about being able to use like a lot of small motions to create a larger thing, especially for like being chronically ill. I've always used printmaking as a way to like slowly create large bodies of work, because I feel like it's much easier to get in the studio and like just tear a few sheets of paper if I'm feeling really sick one week, versus like having to do like large gestural marks on a canvas or something. So the multiple can be used in a bunch of different ways. And then you can continue. Yeah. So this piece, kind of like an exercise in my own language of trying to pare it down from like a larger, more detailed statement to just like a very small, a few words, but that says a lot. So this one statement, ache with many, I'm thinking about like what the many means for somebody who's chronically ill. Like for me personally, it means like this like silent, like enduring chronic pain silently, but like acknowledging that there's so many people out there who are also doing that. And there's like a small, quiet solidarity with that. But there's also like the kind of sad fact of multiplicity if you are chronically ill, to where like there's going to be something else that will happen one day. And that was kind of what I was thinking about after having like weird appointments with these nurses who were like talking about how when I'm like 50, I'll get much worse. And I was like, that's so weird. Why would you say that? But yeah, I just thought about like what the many means. And then the next one, you can go to the next slide. This is from a series called Promise Your Children Everything, which is like a series about like certain, what it feels like to be cared for, but also like a certain guilt in being cared for. So I was thinking about like when I first got sick and I was like my parents were trying to figure out what was happening, and I was trying to figure out what was happening, and I was like kind of taking on guilt from that for not being able to like heal myself in a weird way. So I'm trying to like show like the different levels that like care is a good thing, obviously, but also like it's more complicated than just like this always benign, always happy and joyful experience. So like the top text that's darker says, "I wish I could heal," and then below it you can slightly see the way you healed me. So there's like a dual sentiment there, where the print says, "I wish I could heal the way you healed me," like I wish I could heal um, the same way that you healed me. But there's also like this sentiment of, "I wish I could heal um, how like the method that you healed me." So like the method of healing and the method of caring can like over time become a negative thing, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's kind of, I guess it's a hard thing to describe, but I hope the sentiment carries over. But also I like it because like it shows the way that the way that I use etching in monoprint, like it it can create a dual meaning from poetry. So I always think about my work um, as like I always think about my poems as being pretty essential to like the medium of printmaking. I feel like if I wrote this, it wouldn't really have the same um, linguistic effect that it does as a print. You can go to the next one. This is a piece called "Live the Dream." And it says, "You're so familiar, but I forget you all the time, like a recurring dream." And I was thinking about just, again, like different ways to put poetry to the language of pain, because like the way that we describe pain is so unique to our own experience and so hard to describe. But in the medical world, there's such a push to like just put numbers to it and then like assign meaning to those numbers. And I was trying to think about like the different elements of pain, like how long it lasts or how often the same type of pain occurs, and things that I can't really put into words unless they're behind metaphors. And I think there's a lot of power in that. Like the more people are talking about their bodies and their pain and in metaphors and hard to describe ways, I think the more we'll actually learn about our bodies and we'll learn how to care for each other. So the next slide shows these are all like McGill pain questionnaires that I had printed out by hand on mulberry paper by using soft ground etching. So they're all like these unfilled out, these pain questionnaires that have like a ton of different words to describe pain, but they're all like searing pain, sharp pain, pounding pain. They're all like verbs that are very like aggressive. And so this was like a push to find a language to describe pain that's not just like crushing and like smashing, different words like that. So trying to like find a more nuanced and more I guess like forgiving language for your own body. So one that's not like trying to pose pain or the body as like some violent thing, but like just a metaphor to like to figure out over time. And yeah, that's all my work.
Thanks, Benjamin. Thanks for showing us that. I noticed, I was looking at your website earlier and I noticed something that I think you touched on a little bit here, but that really struck me, which was that I'll just read this bit from your from the about page. You said print is a metaphor for continual healing. It's morphing physicality, a reflection of the body. And I like that you talked about what this like bodily printmaking process is for you, because you really do work these plates and these objects in a like there is this scraping, there's like a bruising almost, there's like gouging, right? Like it's bearing traces of things that have happened to us, to it, the way that we bear traces of things that are happening to ourselves. And that physicality of the plate is a really interesting condition of print in general. But for your work, I just wonder, like, how did you come to print? Like, how did you discover this as an essential way for you to kind of express what you feel you need to express here?
I think like, well, I started out making very like figurative work,
Mhm.
and trying to like represent my experience with chronic illness through like medical imagery and a lot of my own medical documents and things like that. And it always felt like very clinical and very like um, just not genuine to me. And so I started just making a lot of like abstract etchings and stuff, and I got really attracted to like the repetition of printing. And originally, like that repetition of printing was a like coping mechanism to chronic pain. It was like a way for me to like just get my mind off of things and just like make something and like do this repetitive process for a long
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
And then I would like put all these like prints side by side, and I realized like I just started to think about like the way each print holds a history, and each print is like valid, and it's like it existing as an object is like proof that at one point the plate looked like that. And I started to think about like the way that like um I don't know, it's just like I don't know how to describe it. Yeah, but like the the print, like the plate is like totally changed, but there's like one print way back when that like
yeah,
looked totally different. But just thinking about like those two things are like essentially the same object.
yeah, totally.
Yeah, it was really reflective of like the way I was thinking about my body, especially going through like these flare ups and like you're seeing like these new scars come up, but you're like, that was so different 2 months ago. And it's just like, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that. I love what you said. My face went like when you said proof, because I love that idea that the print is this kind of like a bearing witness of the state of the plate at a certain time. Like that idea of proof is a really interesting one to me, especially as we talk about things like chronic illness, when diagnosis can be such a complicated and one might think science is like objective and simple and easy to work through, and it is not, right? Like this idea of proof in chronic illness can also be um, a very fraught thing, right? I are you working from, just to take us a little bit inside the process, is this like when we've seen like works from a one installation or a series, are you, or okay, let me start over. I'm looking at one of the prints you've shown. Am I looking at one plate, or I know you're using etching, you're using mezzotint, you're using all these intaglio, approaches. Is it one plate, or are we running through multiple times with different plates? Just one?
Yeah, everything's just one layer. So
Yeah.
there's like different visual layers from all the processes, but it's all just like one go through the press.
Got it. So it just builds up over time,
Mm.
working on the plate. Very cool. I love that. There's a question from Beth. Beth asks, working with pain words in a nonviolent way is so powerful. Are you influenced at all by Buddhism?
Um, Sorry, there's stuff falling somewhere.
That's okay.
I guess not directly, but there's definitely a lot of writers I know who have like Anne Boyer has this book. I don't think I have it near me, but it's called The Undying, and I know that she talks a lot about um, Buddhist philosophies in regards to disability. And then I definitely know other writers who have referenced it, but I've never like directly engaged.
Yeah.
I
I
want
think
to,
I
yeah.
think I'm also struck from the piece that's in unfinished that I underlined this word joy that you mentioned, that being a kind of unusual source of joy, thinking about this experience of kind of like singing back these very sad like words. I think maybe what Beth is picking up on and what I'm picking up on is a little bit of like a way to kind of like tell me if I'm over determining this, please, but through this experience of trying to find this language that feels like it speaks your experience, like a way of trying to find a way of sitting with this pain and sitting with this illness and accepting it, or maybe finding ways that it can lead to some kind of beautiful experiences or some kind of thing that's more than just pain, right?
Yeah, I think definitely that's pretty spot on. And then also I think like the way that we were talking about like proof,
Yeah.
and, like diagnosis and chronic illness and stuff, I think the great thing for me about this type of work and why I enjoy doing it so much is because it's like so antithetical to that idea of like wanting a firm like diagnosis or a firm answer. Like I really love the fact that like a lot of the metaphors I have are like not continuous, and I like contradict myself quite often in the way I describe my body because that's like essential to my being. Like I
Yeah.
love basking
Totally.
into that, and I feel like that's like totally what medicine like does not allow and does not want.
Right.
Um,
Right.
there's also a quote. My like favorite band of all time is called the Mountain Goats, and there's a quote from the vocalist John Darnielle where he says that suffering is never joyful, but like showing one's capacity for survival always is. So I definitely think about that in my work. Like I think about it as like my capacity for like continuing and just like showing that like being chronically ill is like a very valid and lovely way of living. I think it's very like that's where the joy is for me, you know.
Great. I think that's a really good place to end. If folks have other questions for Benjamin, put them in the Q&A so we can come back to those at the end. And now I'll invite Terry on screen with me and we'll look at Terry's work.
Hey, everybody. I would like to start by saying how much I love Benjamin and Shannon's work. And it reminds me that, you know, all bodies are essential to this world. And if we think disability is the problem and we start there, we don't hear the beautiful voices of people like Benjamin and Shannon. And so I'm just delighted. Thank you very much. And so this is the work that's on the screen is the work that's in the exhibit now, and it's called Mended. And for those of you who know me, I come with a suitcase full of scraps of all kinds in my life. And there are times when I put them back together, and there's times when I tear them up. And the last couple of years, as we all have experienced, it's kind of a time where, you know, we're reworking, we're rethinking, we're looking at old things and putting them together. And that's what essentially my work has always been. But this work in particular is there are parts in here that are pieces of letterpress books that I've done. There are parts in here that are from projects I do with children. There is even a part in this one, the little round red things on the face of this is a frame of ours fell off the piano and broke. And then I realized it was type high and I could print it on the letterpress. So that's kind of what this particular print is. We can go to the next one. And but really all my work is kind of about figuring out, it's very much like Benjamin and Shannon have said, the lens through which I see the world, which is the lens of my body and the disabled body that I live in. I said this many times before, but the thing I love about printmaking is it's not the only thing I do. I also work as a storyteller and a puppeteer. So I'm going to tell you a few stories. How I learned really why speaking from your own viewpoint is so important, and owning your identity, why you must own your identity if you're going to speak to things that are important. And this work is kind of, for me, my own kind of reminder of that lens. I don't walk and use my hands all the time. And but I'm going to tell you a story about when I was first teaching. I grew up, I was born in 1952. So I was born before the 504 and the ADA and all of that. But when I took my first teaching job in printmaking, it was the only legislation about disability was that if your building got government funding, you could make it accessible. And of course, the art building does not get government funding. So I was teaching at Kenyon College on all 4 floors of an inaccessible building, which meant that I crawled every day from the basement to the top floor. In fact, the bathroom was on the upper floor. So it was quite an adventure. And one day, and this was maybe one of the most important moments in my life and understanding of myself and my identity. One day, as I was crawling up the stairs, stopped in the office, and I pulled a piece of paper out of my mailbox, and it was an article about Cheryl Marie Wade, who was a artist with a disability, who was doing some theater projects. And it was a great article, but written across the top, my department chair had written a sentence that said, "Not that you're disabled, but I thought you would like to read this article." And I thought, oh my God, this is why we're getting nowhere. You think it's a compliment to not be who you are. And who we are is how we speak, it's how we sing, it's how we write poetry. And so, having said that, this is every year I try and do one poem, one print at least, where I am celebrating that, exactly that, where my identity comes from. It was the thing that made me decide I needed to go move on to a different job. But, it was just kind of a really big learning experience for me. We can go to the next slide. And this is, these are etchings and woodcuts, and they're all pieced, they're all stitched, they're all cut up, older prints cut up and put back together. And this one is called Back Rhythm, because so much of my life is about the disability that I have, and my back and the way I move. And so again, this is one of those prints that I think of as redesigning my back to be very beautiful and kind of have the rhythm that I think it actually has. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. This piece I have worked and reworked over the years, and you can kind of see in here, they are very in a way like Benjamin's, where there are pieces of paper all glued back together. Some are parts of books, some are parts of older prints. But this one, I was working on this one time, and a friend of mine asked, God, why is there so much water in your work? And I got to thinking about it. And for me, water, and for a lot of people with disabilities, water kind of expresses a buoyancy, an uplift, something that lifts us. Water lifts all of us in the same way. We move in the water with the same kind of grace and beauty, even though for me, getting to the water is a little bit of an issue, but once I'm there and the water lifts, I stand, I swim, I move. And my story about this print is, again, anyone who grew up in the 50s or 60s might recognize them. There was a type of bread that was called sunbeam bread, and on the plastic container that kept the bread, there was a little girl who we just called the sunbeam bread girl. And she had braids, she was beautiful, she was athletic. Sometimes you would see her on a billboard with her legs kind of pushing a swing, and very, just very agile. Well, for me, when I would come from the hospital with my casts on, my mom would, she would tape my legs with these sunbeam bags so that the water, when I would swim, couldn't get in to ruin my casts after surgery. And so I began to kind of associate the beauty of this little sunbeam girl that was always on my legs, that I saw every time I was in the water, with a kind of buoyancy, only it was my kind of buoyancy, not what other people maybe designed. So I think that images of water come from that. I am not a great swimmer, but swimming was something that I did as a child, even with casts on after my surgeries. We can go to the next. This is a print that I call, again, it's reworked from older prints, but I call it Tools for Not Giving Up. It's kind of small. Again, it's that thing about having enough scraps that you can piece, you can put things together. And again, from my own life, I spent a lot of time in the hospital, and I did always go with a suitcase full of things to make other things out of. Like my sister would put in tongue depressors. My dad was a doctor, so we had all these tongue depressors that I could then make into something else, or pieces of paper that could be cut up and pieced, or paper dolls that could be cut out. And when I look at my work now, I think, yes, it was maybe 50 years ago, but I'm still doing exactly the same kinds of things. The craft that I love is the craft that I grew up with. And we can go to the next slide. This is called Roots and Wings. And again, another kind of pieced work with text. A lot of my work has text because I do also work as a book artist. And usually what happens in the work is, after when you do letterpress and you're printing a book, you end up with a lot of text that doesn't work out, or the paper was bent, or something didn't work with the page, or you printed too many of one thing and not another. And so the text ends up being in the work in some other way. And this is from a poem that talks about gravity, the gravity that holds us down, and the uplift of a bird's wing. So I used the text for that poem for this piece. We can go to the next. This is an artist book called Water Lifts. Again, a lot of the work I do has to do with that sense of floating, lifting, being graceful, or reclaiming the grace that someone might not give me credit for having if they saw me walk across a room, or try to walk across a room. But we all have that. We are all, we invent the grace we have by inventing a belief in who we are. We can move to the next slide. And this year, one of my favorite projects of the year, which kind of got me through a very, very hard time, as in 1920, we lost one of the best friends I've ever had, who is also a printmaker. And she and I had truly a friendship like no other. The colophon on this book says something like, we would go out looking for festivals, only to find that the festival was actually inside of us. And her name is Lydia Madrid. She taught at University of New Mexico for a long time, and another college in Ohio. In fact, there's a scholarship in her name now for printmaking at the University of New Mexico. So when I made this, I was trying to figure out, the poem is written, but I was also trying to figure out what to do with the hundreds, literally more than 200 or 300 postcards that I had kept over the 40 years of our friendship. So every book has a postcard in it. These are the one of a kind books, but I also made an edition of hand printed books that all have a postcard that she made. So in a sense, it was really for me about not just making something to celebrate Lydia, but it was also about giving her away to keep her alive. And it just, it was joyous in the ways that she was joyous. And so I'm thrilled to have kind of had time to take this on, and I'm still doing it. I have to say, there's still, I could not possibly use up all the postcards I have. So this project is one that's kind of going on. And we could have the next slide. Thank you. This is an artist book. I said at the beginning, printmaking is not the only thing I do. I also work as a puppeteer. And somewhere in the last, in about 2018 or 2019, I decided to kind of look back at a book that I had done. I had gotten a grant about 40 years ago to go and study puppet characters in England and do a talk about how the history of puppets and what it meant. And I did the project. It was a Mellon grant. And I did the project, made the prints. Great time, did the lectures and all of that, but I never really felt like I uncovered what I was looking for. So I decided to kind of go back and rethink this project. And what I discovered in redoing it is that the thing I didn't understand is the thing I love about puppets is they all have their own. Every puppet theater has their own agency, their own sense of themselves. They work around issues of social justice. They work around issues of speaking for the unspoken, putting things into words that you would not find in another way. So I started highlighting puppet theaters who did just that, and ones that I tended to love. And I ended up with so many, I thought, well, why not do an abecedarium? They're 26, I've got 26 of these puppets. And so this book became the abecedarium. It's called Puppets One Ought to Know, an Abecedarium in 3 acts, little accordion folded book. And we can go to that next. This is the last slide. I put this in because this is what's on my wall right now. Again, a kind of a combination of prints. I am working with things that are becoming larger, even though the parts of them are small, but when I piece them together, I do a lot of quilt making and things like that. And, why not do that with printmaking is kind of what I figured. And so that way I can make these kind of larger prints that are bigger than what I could carry myself. And I can use up a lot of scraps. And in all of these, there's still text from books. This has the same piece of the poem that the other print had with the word gravity in it, and another print of Lydia Madrid's. We call her Big Lydia because our daughter is named Lydia, and so there's postcards of Big Lydia's in this as well. And some of the when I start these prints, I never quite know what they're going to look like when they are finished, because they are pieced, and I never know what I'm going to pull out of my bag of scraps. And that's kind of how I've always worked. And for me, it makes a work more intimate because I learn more about myself that way as I'm putting them together. And I think that's the last slide.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks for showing this work in progress because, and you know what, it's funny because I had a question for you that you basically answered as we were looking at or you can expand on it some more, but like this suitcase of scraps is a very evocative image to me.
Yeah.
And also really, I was looking at these images earlier today and thinking that there really felt like there was a relationship to textiles for you. And this suitcase of scraps also just, it sounds like that sounds like a textile evocation as well to me. So, and so you say you work on quilts. Is that something that predates your work with print? Was it something that you developed in tandem?
Well, no, growing up, being in the hospital as much as I was in school, literally, truly, and I don't know if my sister Becky is in this chat or not, but I'm just going to say, I would literally go to the hospital with one suitcase that had clothes in it and one suitcase that had an instruction book, how to make something out of something else. It was always some kind of, how to use fabric to make your clothes for your dolls, how to make something. I think there was one about how to make flowers out of paper, where you'd hook them together and, oh, there's my sister. It's very, very true. But she would fill this thing up, and there were stories, there were instructions. And so like, how could I do otherwise? And, she expected me to come home with these things finished. I think I worked less on mathematics, almost anybody would tell you that, and more on paper dolls than almost anything that I did in school. And so one thing led to another. And so, yes, I've always sewn. When I was going to school, I don't know that they have this now, but, the boys took shop and the girls took home ec. So of course I sewed, and, and it was something that I've always kept up. And it's a lot of the, again, because I work with puppets, they all have to be dressed in some manner. So their clothes are sewn, and
that's so interesting that that experience growing up translates so clearly to the work that you ended up making as an adult. That's so interesting. And there's, the way that you're kind of building these images from these scraps is such an interesting one to me from, it's like a lack of preciousness to be able to just like cut things up, rearrange them, move them around, stay flexible, like really not like being concerned about like this kind of, perfect print that gets pulled and then that's it. But like a real flexibility in thinking about how you recombine things. And there's also a because you're doing this with these bodies, almost like a grotesqueness in the way the bodies are represented, and there's almost like an exquisite corpse element to the way that you're building them through these like patching together of the different pieces. Can you talk a little about that?
Yes. Well, truly all of the bodies are pieced together, and I just saw a comment by that sister I was talking about she said, tell her about the staples. Well, honestly, again, when I was a child, I went back and I pulled out some things I did as a child, and I would staple things together, all of the papers, all of the, the little bits and pieces. And honestly, it's very much what I do today. And I think it definitely has to do with how I see my own body, which is pieced together, stapled, put back, this didn't work, try again. And, it informs a kind of acceptance of things that may seem imperfect to others, but it's what we live with. And it's not, I think all bodies have needs, and all bodies are essential, but they are not all perfect. None of them are. You know, and I think that's why, you know, that's why our voices are so important. It's easy for somebody who doesn't have a disability to grow up thinking, you know, I'm not going to get old, and I'm not going to get this, and I'm not going to get that, and I will never wear out. And honey, I got to tell you, that just isn't the way it is, because if you are really lucky, you will join us. You will be more like us. So hearing the voices of people who live every day, knowing that the beauty of the world does not come from perfection, it doesn't, in fact, the fragility of who we are is what that beauty comes from. The fact that we know how to depend on someone else without feeling like we're compromised by depending, because we have to. All of that is really about about the beauty of accepting the body that we have.
Yeah, I'll invite Benjamin and Shannon to join us on screen as we finish up here. And if anyone has a last minute question, go ahead and toss that in the Q&A. There's a comment here from Barbara Novak, who says, I was a student of Terry's, and I always liked the feeling of printmaking being improvisational and not having that feeling of the perfect print. In fact, the accidents in printing would inform the process too. I like learning the roots of that feeling from Terry's childhood experiences. And I think, you know, this relates so clearly to what Benjamin and I were talking about, with the way that these plates bear the traces of their own experiences, right? And how that gets recorded in the print as well. So that's a great comment. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Barbara. As we wrap up here, I think I just want to ask, like, well, I have lots of questions. We could do this all night. This has been such an interesting talk. And you've all been so generous with your time. The question I maybe want to end on as we finish up is one about labor. Because print is a very labor intensive process, but it also has the potential to be really uniquely collaborative in the studio through working with, you know, artists and printers working together. And it also has the potential, because print is many things at once, it also has the potential for like a kind of easy, quick reproduction like Shannon's using in order to disseminate things. And that can be a very useful strategy and tool as well. So I wondered if anyone how they think about labor in their own work here, and how maybe that relates to working with disability and chronic illness, and just if there's something to be thought through here, something that's instructive, and for the organizers of the show, for Career Archive work, thinking about that artistic labor is really important. So I want to kind of underscore that a little bit as we close. Just for anyone who wants to maybe take the floor.
Yeah.
Also relating to, you know, I know Benjamin, I was listening to a podcast you were on, and you talked a little bit about relating to that, relating that sense of labor to care as well in your practice.
Yeah, I think also, like, I feel like I've spent a lot of time like over explaining to like a lot of different people things with my body, like nurses or friends or anything. And like I kind of have felt that with like printmaking as well, in a weird way. Like there's like an invisibility to like what happens to make a print. Even if like all the marks are visible, there's like not everyone really understands like how much labor goes into it. And I think that like has reflected like the way that like my experience of disability has operated too, like to where people like really do not see the labor that goes behind it. And I think like for me it's been more of like a meditative, like the labor behind print has always like reflected that labor, and that's been kind of like therapeutic in a way, to find that same like experience in the act of making work. I think is really interesting.
I would add to that too, that the thing about printmaking that is so fabulous is that you are not alone. You can't be, you know, I mean, even when I'm working in the studio alone, but you know, somebody made the paper and somebody, and you have to, the collaborative part of it is such an enormous part. And we just finished a project with the 7th grade class, and we had 50 7th graders in the studio, and watching them work and lift each other's, when they couldn't reach it, somebody would lift something up off the press. And, you know, when I can't reach something, there's always somebody to turn the crank or to, it is just like, if we could live like we do in a print shop, we would be such a better place.
That is a beautiful sentiment, Terry. Yeah, there's that kind of interdependency in print that's like really essential to that making. And Shannon also comes across in your projects as well, and I think is so antithetical to the kinds of like singular artistic genius, right? Like capitalist artist, right? This idea that we have really like, and this like hyper independence, especially in American culture, where we have to go it alone. And I think like practices that work with print really can be a unique place to like rethink that.
Yeah, I really miss that part of being in like a print studio. I haven't really had a kind of home-based print studio since I was an undergrad. And I think a lot of the ways that I work in my practice has in some ways been trying to like find ways to have that type of feeling outside of that context. And also in response to your question, there's this quote from the artist David Hammonds that has been like a real guide for me for a long time, which I never remember the exact phrasing, but it's something like abandon any art form that costs too much and to make it as cheaply as possible. And I think about that both like financially, but also in terms of like working as a disabled artist, like trying to move towards processes that feel accessible to me or easeful to me. And I often don't do that, but you know, still trying to kind of like keep that as a conceptual part of how I'm trying to work. And then I think for me, there also this challenge comes in of like, yeah, if I'm using a photocopier, like what can I do to kind of still imbue that with some of that kind of like specialness or like intentionality that comes from print. And yeah.
And perhaps your handwritten words are one way. All of you work with text as well. And, you know, I think that's an area that I would have loved to have more time to spend talking to you all about tonight. But I think what Benjamin's spoken eloquently about tonight in this way of thinking about how text represents these experiences, and how Terry has spoken about the importance of speaking from your own experience and really centering that in your own perspective, and using that as your perspective, and not trying to stifle that is really key. And I think, Shannon, that also comes across in the subjectivity that you put into your own sort of trace, right? Like I can feel the artist in these works, even when they're like, you know, an installation in Chelsea in collaboration with the High Line, which I still see sometimes walking around. Everyone look for Shannon's work when walking around Chelsea. There are still some vestiges of that around. Thank you all so much for this. I wish we had so much more time. You've all been wonderful. I have to let you go. I have to let our audience go, but thank you again, Benjamin. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Shannon. And thank you to my team behind the scenes tonight for putting this artist talk together. Megan, Emma, and our interns, Maya Fisher and Robin Siddall. Have a great night, everybody, and we'll see you very soon.